Hello, welcome to our conversation starter. Today, I'm talking with Rabbi Jason Kimelman-Block, the Washington director of Bend the Arc. He received his rabbinic ordination from Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, and his BA is from Grinnell, so he understands the Midwest. He gets that. Previously, he was the director of the PANIM Institute for Jewish Leadership and Values. We are delighted to have you with us. So, Rabbi Kimelman-Block, can you start by kind of giving us a sense of the map of what 2020 looked like in February, say, and what was going to be your schedule and agenda this year?
Sure. Thanks. And first of all, it's just, thank you so much for having me here. Of course, one of the things that we were intending was to be in Milwaukee, and I was really excited to be coming to town, and disappointed to be not be able to have the opportunity to be there in person. But I really appreciate the museum giving me this opportunity to interface with Milwaukee and the Jewish community of Milwaukee through this virtual venue. Yeah, of course, we had normal plans, like I think everyone did, and our focus this year being, we're an organization that does both advocacy work in Washington and the state level, and we also do community organizing, and we also do political work as well. And so our focus has always been around the elections this year, and mobilizing for our candidates and mobilizing people to get out. We were planning on lots of door knocking, planning on lots of doing some in-person, fundraisers and events like that. And of course, that all changed. We're planning to be in the museum during the weekend of the DNC, which originally wasn't supposed to be this week, as you know.
No.
And not only did, I guess I could talk about, I could talk about the changes that we made, but beforehand, I'll just say, as an organization, because we're a national organization and we have staff all over the country, our headquarters in New York, but we have offices in California and in Washington, we have, people everywhere. We're very used to doing distance work. I'm very used to, for a decade, I've been using precursors to Zoom and, other forms of distance work. But of course, everything changed. The other thing I would say that was very big on the docket for us for 2020 was we were going to have our second national conference in Washington, D.C. We had our first one in 2016, which was wonderful. And we did not want to be an organization that had a conference every single year because of how much work it involves. So we decided every 4 years was about the right pace for us. And it was devastating to be planning for a year and a half for a gathering to bring everyone together and to not be able to do that.
Can you also take us into kind of what are the core tenets of the Bend the Arc platform? Like, what are the things, and I know it shifts based on what the kind of national and local political priorities are, but what are those pillars at the moment?
Yeah. The main, what Bend the Arc Jewish Action is we're a community of Jews and allies who, from all walks of Jewish life, from every denomination, every affiliation or none. And we come together as Jews in solidarity with partners and with frontline communities to try to make the country a better place for all of us. So as a result, we are working on issues that impact our neighbors and impact the whole community. So issues that we have been most engaged in are things like immigrant justice and immigration reform, racial justice issues, and how that intersects with the criminal justice system, voting rights, those kind of issues. All of our work we do in partnership and in solidarity with directly impacted communities, which sometimes is us, but often is not us. So that's sort of the way that we do our work.
So with that kind of, March, we're not doing a DNC, probably. We're not, and I
Yeah.
think that came in more as May, June, like that.
Yeah.
But also, we're not doing a national conference. We're not doing all of this. What was the kind of immediate sense of, well, what can we do? What did you guys pick up?
Sure. So, I mean, luckily, because of our experience internal in the organization of just our practice of like, how do we make an all staff meeting actually interesting and engaging for online and in the Zoom format? We were thinking about these things for a couple of years because that's how we've been doing our work internally. I think it gave us a leg up in terms of being able to pivot pretty quickly to how do we move these things online. We know that it's always better to bring people together, but there are lots of strategies that we can have to make being online not just feel like a conference call. And so our conference was one thing that I think we did an amazing job with, and I can tout that because it was my talented colleagues that were most responsible for that. But we moved our 3-day conference to an online format, and we did all kinds of things to make it not just feel like a Zoom meeting, but to make it feel like a real gathering. So we know when you go to a conference, the things that you tend to do are not just go to the sessions and take copious notes. You meet with people, you run into people in the hallway, you schmooze in the lounge.
You duplicate that schmoozing?
Yeah.
Well,
one thing we did is we had a separate Zoom room that was called the coffee shop that was set up with a Zoom background like a coffee shop, and people knew that they could just drop in there at any time and just speak to whoever happens to show up at that time if you got tired of being in the sessions. So that, led for some nice serendipitous conversations. We also did, some things in the evening. So we didn't keep it content heavy. We had some arts programs in the evening, did some, some prayer meditation to begin the day, just to kind of give it that rhythm of gathering together. And I would say it really felt like, we had some very talented tech people that, helped us create that feel. And I thought it worked quite well.
That's amazing. How many people participated?
We ended up having a couple of thousand.
And what do you think, is that more than you would have had if you had it in person?
Absolutely. I mean, we were hoping to have 1,000 people in person, and then we had, I think over twice that. And, it was easier for people to come. People could join from there. It didn't involve a plane ticket and a hotel. So that was like a silver lining from that. And also from my work, which is, directly with Congress and people in Washington, it was a lot easier to get remarks from members of Congress recorded than it would have been to physically get them there to give their 5-minute speech. So
I wonder
that was
if
helpful as well.
In the future of conferences, if they're going to all just be wait, no, I can do this by Zoom.
I think all kinds of things we're going to start rethinking in light of our experience now. Of course, we can't wait to get back in person. But I think all walks of life, our medical appointments are actually a little easier now, I will say, from my own perspective, to not have to wait for an hour in the waiting room while, to have that conversation with the doctor for 20 minutes or whatever it is. If I was in charge, I would keep the online appointments for most things in that sense. And, in the synagogue that I'm active with, it's been really interesting on the one hand, being separate and in our own space and really dying to come back together and longing to come back together. And at the same time, meetings, conversations, educational programs are in a lot, I'd say, higher attended than if you had to physically come into the building to join.
So conferences, getting that mass people, getting people to breakout rooms, things like that, that seems, doable. this idea of grassroots
Yeah.
organizing in COVID.
Yeah.
You know, how are you motivating people in this
Sure.
way that they don't get that energy high of knocking on a door and having that
Sure.
person-to-person interface?
Sure. Well, I mean, the first thing I would say is there are COVID safe ways that people are mobilizing, outside in the street and not just in the computer. So, we are, participating in certain demonstrations that, there's proper distancing, and you're, often doing things, thinking of like the camera and sort of like what the image you're going to project out there are. So that's what I would say first. And second is, we have found that people are coming together and ready to do the work in whatever form that takes. So, we did, as we launched our campaign work earlier this spring, we created virtual campaign launch parties. So we had individual grassroots leaders that, in a different era would have invited, a number of people to their home or to, another space to talk about the campaign and the goals and the work we're going to be doing. We had that online instead, different launch parties, and over 500 people came to those. And that was wonderful. Like just earlier this week, we had some of our chapters in California. We had grassroots leaders, there were about a dozen of them, that took on the task of like planning, recruitment, facilitation, tech, and did it was a criminal justice campaign around one of the propositions, as California has all of these propositions related. So it kind of a racial justice framed around criminal justice reform. And we had over, I think it was around 60 people join that meeting. So we're seeing people, getting involved on that level. In Pittsburgh, our minion there, that's what we call our chapters, our moral minions. So our minion in Pittsburgh had a conversation with Zach Banner, who's the offensive tackle for the Pittsburgh Steelers, as part of a panel with Jewish and Black community activists, as well as Jewish Black community activists, that was on solidarity and looking at racism and anti-Semitism. And that ended up being a 2-hour conversation that over 1,700 people joined and watched.
So
yeah.
Just in the moral minion piece is something that you guys have been launching. Was there a kind of more intensive pressure to expand that? I know Milwaukee just got a moral minion this year. Was that something in light of COVID that you're like, wait, we already have this kind of hub model that we can use, and was there interest from these outside communities, or was it from Bend the Arc, Jewish Action, to the communities at large?
Yeah. So, I mean, we've had these local groups and moral minions, and that have been, some existence for a long time, and some have been growing and, just being established at this time. And so, those programs, come from the bottom up. It comes from, what activists want to do and what's kind of most relevant. Like in Portland, they did a town hall. In Austin, they had an educational event on policing. In Seattle, they did a teaching on immigrant detention. Jacksonville, Florida, did an action hour. These are all kind of things that the local groups organized, and those things were all over Zoom, and really came from what the work that they wanted to do. There's also other ways that we've been shifting our work to think about how, there, of course, with the street demonstrations in the past, in the past number of months have been incredible and really inspiring. And we've also been thinking about, are there creative ways to get attention on things that don't necessarily involve, organizing a demonstration? I think some of that outpouring was spontaneous and, can't be necessarily just directed by an organization. So one of the things we did was a few weeks ago, was to use a projection display against the building. So in our case, this was an action we did on the Republican National Committee that was trying to highlight some of the hateful things that Republican candidates have said. And so we broadcast the quotes of those leaders up in projection on top of the building. And that was just a way to get attention, to highlight our message, but also, did not involve having to get hundreds of people physically together in a place.
That particular focus was on white nationalism.
Yes.
And anti-Semitism in elections. Do
Yeah.
you feel, and I mean, we're in the kind of, I would say we're heading towards the home stretch of the campaign.
God will. I hope so.
I mean, it's the beginning of the end, right? Maybe it's the end of the beginning, who knows?
Certainly a hurdle when we get
but wherever we are, do you feel in some ways that the tenor of the campaign, and you're in DC where there's this constant sense of politics, in some ways it's been a much quieter campaign on both sides. Right. But are the kind of is it the level of kind of partisan rancor and also the level of kind of the anti-Semitism, the things that you guys were calling out, do you feel like it's risen to a level in previous cycles, or is it a different level? Is it heightened?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we saw, I guess I would back up. In 2018, we saw anti-Semitism used by political candidates to a level that I had never seen in my lifetime. We saw flyers with candidates with piles of money and exaggerated features. We had candidates who ran attack ads, again, with piles of money, pictures of George Soros, like just kind of imagery I never thought I would see in the United States. And those things were not outliers. It was consistent at multiple levels among, some were federal campaigns, some were local, some were state, and we saw a number of them. And unfortunately, that strategy was not repudiated after the 2018 elections. And I think we're seeing it being played again and sometimes accelerated. We just saw 2 weeks ago the Senate. John Ossoff, who's a Jewish candidate running for Senate in Georgia, was an ad was made by Senator Perdue, sitting senator, that had his nose artificially lengthened with a picture with him standing next to Chuck Schumer, the Jewish Senate Majority Leader, with the text saying he's trying to buy the election. Oh. And so that we're seeing more and more, and unfortunately it's not an outlier. I would also say that it's certainly one of the tools of fear and division that we're seeing, but of course it's not the only one, and the Jewish community is by far not the only community that's under attack or being used in this way for political purposes. We see that with the way immigrants get kind of politicized and demonized. Of course, we see that with the protests and racial justice protests being labeled as treasonous and all of those things, or not to mention the combination of the mix of anti-Semitism and racism that says that the protests are just funded by, it's usually George Soros, as if, Black people couldn't rise up for their own liberation without a wealthy Jew financing. So it's like, has this mix of combination of racism and anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, we're seeing that a good amount right now. And my main hope is that not only that Americans will repudiate that message, but that the politicians that see this as a path to victory will realize that it's not a path to victory, that it is a dead end, and we can move forward to people trying to hopefully compete for the best ideas and the best ways to actually address the problems that we have in our country.
So, since it's the DNC, kind of, sort of, virtually, what sorts of things are you doing anything to mark this week, or is this kind of just keep doing what you've been doing?
Yeah, what we're doing is primarily, paying close attention to what's happening. We're joining, some of the virtual events, participating, in this conversation, which is wonderful. We just formally, we're an organization that does endorsements. So we just, in the lead up to the convention, formally endorsed the Biden-Harris ticket. But we are, mainly participating in events in that way.
And kind of going into this next home stretch, we'll call it the beginning of the end. What are the kind of big, audacious goals that you see Ben the Ark Jewish Action taking on and saying, this is what we're here to do?
Sure. A few things. We are trying to make sure that any candidate that tries to use anti-Semitism in their campaigns or weaponize anti-Semitism pays a price for that. So one of our main goals is to make sure that people, when anti-Semitism is used, it gets called out, it gets highlighted, and is seen as a liability, as we did when President Trump's campaign used the triangle that had been used against Nazi political opponents in an ad against Antifa, which was really about trying to attack the racial justice protesters. We broke that story, we called that out, and Facebook, for the first time ever, took down an ad that the president used for violating its policies. So that's just an example of the kind of thing that we want to monitor and pay attention to, because it's so dangerous. We also have goals of being a part of the racial justice movement that is rising up and is accelerating right now. We want to ensure that that the Jewish community is part of that, is an important part of that movement. That white Jews, that Black Jews, that Jews of color are participating actively and proudly in that work. And our long-term goal is to try to lay the groundwork for a multiracial democracy in this country. If you think about it, really, it's something that this country hasn't experienced. It's a vision that it's a vision that this country holds out often, but in terms of, an actual full multiracial democracy where everyone's represented, where people's voices are heard, where we have equal voices to what our leaders say and to power. That's something we haven't experienced before. So we're really, it's a vision that inspires us. And that work is going to be, probably generations to achieve, but it's an extraordinary time right now. I feel like there are certain moments in history when we look back where the opportunity opens for things to change very quickly. And I'm convinced we're in one of those moments right now. And so we want to make sure that, we do all we can. And also that, when the Jewish community looks back at this moment 30 years from now, we can honestly and proudly say that that we were a full part of making this country better. And want to make sure that we don't miss that opportunity as a community.
I think that's a pretty big and audacious goal.
Yes. Check back with us in February.
In hopefully less than 30 years.
Yes.
It has been a pleasure talking with you today. Are there any other things that you kind of wanted to get to that we didn't have a chance to in our talk?
Well, I'd say if you're interested in hearing more about our work, you can find us at bendthearc.us. You'll see our work there. There'll be a link to our political action committee work, as well as our educational work at Bend the Arc, a Jewish Partnership for Justice. And that's kind of the best place to keep up with what we're doing.
Thank you so much for taking time out. Someday something's going to happen in Milwaukee, and you'll be here, and we'll reconvene then.
Absolutely. I look forward to that.